Morning I was supposed to move into my first home. I stood on the sidewalk in front of a locked door, watching a moving truck idle at the curb, and thought, this cannot be real. My name is Leah. I'm 31 years old. I'm a physical therapist. I work hard, I save harder, and I don't ask anyone for anything I can't eventually pay back. That's just how I was raised. 18 months before that morning, I met Ryan's family for the first time over Sunday dinner at his parents' place in Naperville. His mother, I'll just call her my mother-in-law because that's what she was about to become, made pot roast and set the table with cloth napkins. She was warm that night. Effortlessly warm, the kind of warm that makes you feel like you've known someone for years. She told me I had a beautiful smile. She asked about my work, my family, whether I preferred red or white wine. I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I should have paid more attention to the way Ryan watched her when she spoke. Not the way you watch someone you love. The way you watch someone you're afraid to disappoint. We got engaged in October. Simple proposal. He knew I didn't want a scene. At a restaurant in the West Loop we'd been going to since our second date. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I was happy. I was genuinely, completely happy. The apartment hunt started in January. We'd agreed on renting first, then buying. The Chicago market is brutal, and neither of us wanted to rush into a mortgage. We had a number. $2,200 a month was our ceiling, and we stuck to it. After 6 weeks of open houses and disappointing viewings, we found a 2-bedroom in Wicker Park with original hardwood floors, south-facing windows, and a landlord who actually answered the phone. I signed the lease on a Thursday. I paid the security deposit and first month's rent out of my own savings, $4,400 total, because Ryan's account was tied up waiting on a wire transfer from a freelance contract. He said he'd pay me back within the week. That was fine. I trusted him. My mother-in-law came to see the apartment the following Saturday. Ryan had invited her without asking me, which I noted but didn't make an issue of. She walked through every room with her hands clasped in front of her, nodding the way people do when they're forming an opinion they haven't decided to share yet. She asked how far it was from the nearest expressway. She asked about parking. She asked, very casually, whether we'd considered living somewhere closer to family during the first year of marriage. I said we liked the neighborhood. She smiled and said, of course, of course. 2 days later, she called Ryan. I know what was said on that call, because he told me, or at least he told me a version of it. She thought Wicker Park was too far, too expensive for what it was, too many bars on the street. She had a friend with a 2-flat in Elmhurst. Much nicer, better school district for when the time comes, and the rent was only $1,800. Ryan said he'd talk to me about it. He didn't talk to me about it. Or rather, he mentioned it once, lightly, the way you mention something you've already decided you don't want to fight about. I said I didn't want to live in Elmhurst, 40 minutes from my clinic. He said, sure, okay. That was the end of it. Or so I thought. The move-in date was March 15th. I'd booked a moving company 6 weeks out. 2 men in a truck, $650 for a half day, and arranged for the utilities to transfer into my name on the 14th. I'd bought new curtains. I'd measured the windows twice. I had a drawer organizer set still on the packaging sitting in the corner of my studio because I was that ready to be somewhere new. The night before, Ryan and I ordered pizza and watched a movie. He seemed fine. A little quiet, maybe, but he got quiet when he was tired. I didn't push it. The next morning, I drove to Wicker Park ahead of the truck because I wanted to be there when it arrived. Parking was tight, so I found a spot a block away and walked, pulling my keys out before I even rounded the corner. The building door was locked. That wasn't unusual. The front entrance required a fob. I had a fob. I pressed it to the reader. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. Still nothing. I stood there for a moment, just looking at the door because sometimes you need a second to accept that the ordinary thing you expected to happen is not going to happen. Then I called the landlord. He answered on the 3rd ring. I said, "Hi, this is Leah. I'm supposed to be moving in today, apartment 2B, and my fob isn't working." There was a pause. Not a confused pause. A careful one. He said, "Ms. Leah, I thought you'd been notified. The lease was canceled last week." I heard the words. I understood each one individually. They did not make sense in sequence. "I'm sorry," I said. "What?" He told me that someone had called his office on March 9th, 6 days before my move-in date, and said that there had been a family emergency and we would no longer be taking the apartment. He said the person had given my name and my phone number and had told him specifically not to call because I was dealing with a loss in the family and would be in touch to discuss the deposit when I was ready. I sent an email, he said, and I could hear that he felt terrible, to the address on the application. Ryan's email address, the one on the joint application. I sat down on the front step of my own apartment building in my moving clothes, and I did the math very slowly. Someone had called pretending to be me or pretending to speak for me and canceled the lease. Someone had told the landlord I was grieving so he wouldn't call to confirm. Someone had made sure the email went to Ryan, not to me, so I wouldn't find out. There was only one person in the world who had any reason to do this. The moving truck pulled up behind me while I was still sitting on the step. The driver rolled down his window and asked if I wanted to start unloading. I said, "Give me 10 minutes. I called Ryan. He didn't pick up. I called him again. Voicemail. I sat with the phone in my hand and I thought about every conversation we'd had in the past 2 weeks, filtering it differently now, looking for the silence where an explanation should have been. I called my mother-in-law. She picked up on the second ring, which told me everything. "Leah," she said, in a voice that was already braced for impact. "Did you cancel my apartment?" I said, not yelling. I don't yell when I'm really angry. My voice just goes very flat. There was a pause. Then Ryan and I talked about this. We agreed that Wicker Park wasn't the right stop, I said. "Did you call my landlord, give him my name, and cancel my lease without my knowledge or my consent?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "I did what was best for. I need a yes or a no." Silence. "Yes," she said finally. "But Leah, if you'll just listen." I hung up. I sat for another minute. The moving guys were scrolling their phones, patient, unbothered. I thought about my $4,400. I thought about the curtains still in the bag in my trunk. I thought about the version of Ryan who hadn't called me back, and what that silence meant, and how long he'd known. Then I stood up, smoothed out my jacket, and started making phone calls. The first call was to a real estate attorney. I didn't have one on speed dial. I had to Google it, but I found one who offered 15-minute free consultations, and I explained the situation while pacing the sidewalk in front of the building. She used the word impersonation twice. She said depending on what I could document, there might be grounds for a civil claim against my mother-in-law for tortious interference with contract. She said to get everything in writing from the landlord, the date of the call, what was said, any records he had of the communication. I called the landlord back. He was quiet and cooperative and clearly horrified. He emailed me the notes from the March 9th call within the hour, date, time, the specific language used, the fake emergency. He also said, and he offered this without me asking, that he would be willing to re-execute the lease if I wanted the apartment back, and that he'd waive the resigning fee given the circumstances. I said I'd let him know. Ryan finally called at 11:43 a.m. By that point, I was sitting in my car, the moving truck still parked at the curb, because I'd asked them to wait while I figured out what I was doing, which I'd agreed to pay them for at the hourly rate. "Leah, I can explain," he said. I said, "Did you know?" A pause that lasted about 2 full seconds. "She told me on the 8th, he said. "She said she'd already called and that the landlord had agreed to." "She told you on the 8th, I said, "and you waited 7 days to tell me." "I was trying to figure out how to—" "You were trying to figure out how to tell me," I said, "that your mother impersonated me, canceled our home, lied to our landlord about a family death. And you knew about it for a week and said nothing." He started talking about how his mother had good intentions, how she'd found this other place in Elmhurst, how she just wanted us to be closer, how if I would just look at it before deciding. I listened to all of it. I let him finish. Then I said, "I need you to tell me one thing. If your mother had done this to your apartment, your lease, your deposit, your home, and I had known about it for 7 days and said nothing, what would you call that?" The silence that followed was the most honest thing he said to me that entire conversation. "I want you to know," I said, "that I'm going to handle this, and then I'm going to need some time to think about us." I called my best friend Priya and asked if I could crash at her place in Logan Square for a few nights. She said obviously, immediately, with a kind of no questions energy that made me exhale for the first time all morning. I paid the moving crew for their time, 3 hours at the hourly rate, $195, no fault of theirs, and sent them home. I spent that afternoon documenting everything. The landlord's call records, the email he'd sent me with the notes, a screenshot of the original lease with my signature on it, a screenshot of my bank statement showing the $400 transfer. Then I called the attorney back and formally retained her for an hour of her time. She was direct. Under Illinois law, what my mother-in-law had done, calling a landlord, identifying herself in connection with my lease, misrepresenting the reason for cancellation, directing the landlord not to contact me, constituted potential fraud and possibly identity fraud depending on whether she'd explicitly claimed to be me. The landlord's notes used the phrase, "The woman on the call said she was calling on behalf of Leah and with her full knowledge." That phrase would matter. We also talked about the deposit. The landlord, to his credit, had not yet returned it to anyone. When my mother-in-law had called, she'd apparently asked for the $4,400 back to be refunded to the credit card on file, except the credit card on file was mine. She'd told him the account was being monitored by the family. He'd gotten uncomfortable and hadn't processed anything yet. My attorney said that was actually lucky and that I should contact him immediately to confirm that no refund should be issued without my direct written authorization. I called the landlord. He confirmed. He also said, quietly, like he wasn't sure if he should say it, "I don't think she expected me to actually talk to you." "No," I said. "I don't think she did either." Ryan called me 3 more times that afternoon. I didn't pick up. I wasn't punishing him. I genuinely needed to think, and I couldn't do that while managing his feelings at the same time. I stayed at Priya's for 4 days. She fed me, she didn't make me talk until I wanted to, and on the second night, she opened a bottle of wine and said, very calmly, "Tell me what you actually want. Not what you're supposed to want. What do you want?" I thought about it for a while. I wanted the apartment. I wanted my deposit back. I wanted to be with someone who, when given the choice between protecting me and avoiding conflict with his mother, chose to protect me. I was only going to get 2 of those 3 things. I called the landlord on day 4 and told him I wanted the apartment back. He re-executed the lease that afternoon. I hand-delivered a certified check for the remaining utilities deposit, and we shook hands in the lobby. He said, in a tone that was somehow both professional and deeply human, "I hope things get better for you." They already were. My attorney sent a formal demand letter to my mother-in-law the following week. It outlined the documented facts, the date of the call, the misrepresentation, the attempted redirection of my refund, the financial damages including the moving crew cost and attorney fees. It stated that if she did not issue a cashier's check for the full amount within 14 days, we would be proceeding with a civil claim. It did not ask for anything punitive. It asked only for what had been taken. She paid within 8 days. Ryan and I talked on day 5. He came to Priya's. I asked him to because I needed to be somewhere I felt stable, and we sat at the kitchen table and I told him everything that had happened since the morning of March 15th. Not to punish him, but because I needed him to understand that while he'd been trying to figure out how to tell me, I had been managing a crisis alone. I'd hired an attorney, I'd fought for my deposit, I'd found a way back into my own home without his help or his mother's permission. I told him that I loved him. I meant it. I also told him that what his silence had done wasn't something I could reason away, that I could handle a difficult mother-in-law. I'd known that was part of the package. What I couldn't handle was a partner who knew I was walking into a locked door and said nothing. He cried. He apologized. Genuinely, I think, not strategically. He said he'd spent 7 days telling himself it would work out, that I'd see the Elmhurst place and change my mind, that his mother would come around. He said he knew now that all of that was cowardice. I appreciated that he knew. I told him I needed more time. We didn't end the engagement that day, but we entered a different phase of it, one that involved couples counseling, which I required, and a very direct conversation with his mother that he had to initiate alone, without me in the room, and then report back to me honestly. I told him those were my terms. He met them. It wasn't fast and it wasn't clean, and there were weeks where I wasn't sure which direction we were heading, but he met them. I moved into the Wicker Park apartment on March 22nd, 1 week late. Priya helped me carry boxes. We ordered Indian food and sat on the floor of my new living room surrounded by unpacked things, and she said, "Look at you, you got your apartment back." I looked at the south-facing windows. The light was doing exactly what I'd imagined it would. "I did," I said. "I want to say something to anyone watching this who is in the early stages of a relationship with someone who has a controlling parent. Not the parent, the partner. Pay attention to what they do in the moment they have to choose. Not in a low-stakes moment, in the real one. Because you will eventually be in a situation where someone asks them to prioritize you, and a different person is asking them to stay quiet. Watch what they do with that. Not what they say afterward. What they do when it counts, in real time, when you can't see them making the choice." Ryan had to earn back something he didn't even realize he'd been carrying. We're still working on that. Some days, it feels like we'll get there. The apartment helps, having a space that is mine, that I fought for, that no one gave me or took from me. The curtains fit perfectly, by the way. I measured them twice, and I was right both times. I've thought a lot about why things unfolded the way they did. Not in a bitter way, more like turning something over in your hands until you understand the weight of it. My mother-in-law made a calculated decision. She decided that what she wanted mattered more than what I had signed my name to, more than what I had saved for, more than my right to know what was being done in my name. And she got away with it for 6 days, because Ryan let her. That's the part I kept coming back to. Not the act itself, but the silence around it. The 7 days he spent figuring out how to tell me while I was buying curtains and measuring windows for a home I didn't know I'd already lost. There's a version of this story where I fell apart, where I sat on that front step and cried until the moving guys felt awkward and left. I understand that version. It would have been reasonable. But I think what my mother-in-law miscalculated, what a lot of people miscalculate when they decide to move someone else's life around without asking, is that some people, when they hit a wall, don't sit down. They start looking for a door. I'm not saying that makes me special. I'm saying it was a choice. And I had to make it fast, alone, on a sidewalk in Wicker Park with a truck running behind me. What I've come to understand is that your integrity, the real kind, not the performed kind, only shows up when there's something to lose. My mother-in-law had options in that situation. She could have called me directly. She could have made her case. She could have disagreed openly and let me disagree back. She chose deception instead, which tells you exactly what she thought of me. Someone to be managed, not respected. Ryan had options too, and his choice, silence, for 7 days, told me something I needed to know before we got married, not after. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he was afraid. But here's what I've learned about fear as an excuse. It protects the person feeling it, not the person depending on them. His fear cost me $650 in moving fees, 4 days on Priya's couch, and a week of legal back and forth I shouldn't have had to manage alone. Fear, when you act on it by doing nothing, is still a choice. It just gets dressed up as helplessness. The thing I'm most proud of, and I say this without any performance, I genuinely mean it, is that I didn't burn anything down. I didn't call his mother names. I didn't post about it while I was still raw. I documented, I retained counsel, I asked for exactly what I was owed, and I got it. 14 days later, I had a cashier's check and my apartment keys. That restraint wasn't weakness, it was precision. There's a difference. I think the lesson, if there is one, isn't about toxic in-laws or controlling mothers. Those exist everywhere and always will. The lesson is about what you do when someone reveals who they are, not who they told you they were. Not who you hoped they might be, who they actually are, in the moment it costs them something to be decent. Watch that. Remember it. And then decide accordingly, not in anger, not in grief, but clearly, with your eyes open. The curtains fit. The light comes through exactly the way I imagined. Some mornings I stand at those south-facing windows and I think, I fought for this. Not someone else. Me. That feeling doesn't have a price, but I know what it cost.